Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. So to briefly introduce myself, I guess over the last 10 years or so, I've basically been studying the internet and what the internet is doing to all of us in two different ways. Firstly, as a journalist, so trying to understand all the human stories and going on cybercrime raids with the police and going over to Kosovo and interviewing fake news merchants. And then kind of more formally, with the trying to understand and build technology and working in teams that do that to analyze the enormous amounts of data which social media platforms now routinely produce. We were just getting ready to defend the US elections at the beginning of this year. And then the pandemic hit, of course, and kind of everything changed and nothing changed all in a single moment. We kind of frantically began to pivot really to try and understand what the World Health Organization called the infodemic that began to swirl around society. This was a kind of collection of disinformation and misinformation, miracle cures, sometimes conspiracy theories, outright lies, half-truths that all seemed to be mixed together and reaching a public that was now in their living rooms unprecedentedly digital in ways which were much more than ever before. But I really wanted to kind of just really share what we are learning about the nature of the infodemic. First stop on this research was the far right. We know from experience that the far right is more tied to the production of disinformation at moments of great societal vulnerability than any other group. So to begin to do that, we took 34, and these are of course just indicative, 34 Facebook groups that we know are associated with the far right, and collected 150,000 of their posts that they'd sent since January. We wanted to understand the communities that these groups were collected in, and we found 5. There were 5 main communities or clusters of groups. 4 of those clusters were clustered around 4 main themes that we know the far right always talk about. One was Islam, one was Judaism, one was LGBT, and one was immigration. But the most interesting group was the big one, was group number 5. This was by far larger than any of the others. And it was interested in a theme that had been completely transformed as a result of the coronavirus. It was a theme that has to do with elites. So this is something which they hadn't really spoken about really since by January, but by February and March, the discussion had began to build and get bigger and bigger, which really focused on people like Jeff Bezos and the Rothschilds and Bill Gates. Essentially, the claim that was being made in greater and greater quantities and more of it being tied explicitly to coronavirus was that the lockdown and the coronavirus itself is a tool of social control. That the curtailments to our liberties are not ones which are there for our benefit, but they are in fact to control society, to roll out 5G, to in place a system of mass vaccinations, and that this is just another step in a long line of things that elites like those people they claim have done in order to basically bring society under their heel. But as we begin to delve into all of this, we realized that there were a series of links to what I would call the fringe medical and political worlds, which the far right kept referring to. This was their version of basically mainstream news. And in their thousands, these posts kept linking to these sites. There were 34 that we identified that had basically shared materially false information about coronavirus, and had been identified by a fact-checking organization called NewsGuide as having done so. We looked at all the interactions, everything that, every time someone on Facebook had liked or commented or shared any post that linked to one of these sites. And the numbers are, I think anyway, fairly astonishing. To give you a benchmark, the World Health Organization or the US Centers for Disease Control, two main global public health authorities that have been leading the global response to the pandemic, they receive around 6 million interactions on Facebook from January up to now, over the time period we looked at. The Epoch Times, which I'll forgive you for not ever having heard of before because it's a fringe conspiracy site that also shares health misinformation regarding coronavirus, over the same time period received 48 million interactions on Facebook. So I'm going to say that one more time, because that number really took a while to sink in for me. The World Health Organization, 6 million. The Epoch Times, 48 million. If you add all these websites up together, these 34 websites, all of them sharing materially false information about coronavirus, we have 80 million interactions on Facebook over the same time period that the two main global authorities have received 12. It's a world that it really isn't just one where information is floating out in the ether. It's a world of social organization and activism. And it can go one of two ways next, I think. Kind of either this will fizzle out as the lockdown lifts, or as the lockdown lifts, this is going to become a street-based movement and potentially even a civil disobedience movement. The first risk, of course, is that a lot of the information that this world is sharing in its millions is harmful for the people that are receiving it. It is a world that will simply say that is not what keeps us safe. The real danger here is not the virus, it's the mainstream, and it's the mainstream which we're going to now organise and take action to protect ourselves from. I don't have a huge amount of time, so I don't want to dwell on the wider kind of like lessons here, because I do actually want to share some practical ideas about how we can actually resist all of this and how, at least individually, we can stay somewhat safe. So basically, information has been reconceptualized to be something which warfare happens within. And as soon as you think of information in those terms, you know, like air, sea, land, space, and information, you begin to build entirely new capabilities to try and dominate this battle space. You build up capabilities in order to control the information that people see. You build up capabilities to attack the informational capabilities of your opponents. And that is largely what I see, both the far right and in fact a whole other group of people that I haven't had time to talk about, but all the autocratic militaries of the world, both doing now with coronavirus. If you can control what people think the cause of it is, what its consequences are, you are able to control what the post-pandemic world will look like that we're all going to step back into. And that is the current conflict that I see happening online. I want to actually turn to the things that we can all do. At the beginning of the lockdown, I wrote 7 rules for staying safe online. I think digital hygiene was the way that they were described by Wired. Rule 1, guard against outrage. It is the easiest way of manipulating you online. So one of the key things that we can simply do is just simply to get less angry about the stuff that we see online. Lesson 2 is slow down. So one of the things we can simply do is actually just add a slice of time between receiving a piece of content and acting on it. That does genuinely allow more deliberative parts of our brain, rather than the more primordial lizard bits of our brain, to kick in, and it actually just makes our reactions more smarter and less instinctive. 3, beware the passive scroll. If there's a golden rule maybe here, which is that the information that you want to find is not the information that wants to find you. So don't sit there and let the information find you. Number 4, I think, on my list is use the internet proactively. That is a much safer way of doing it. Be very conscious about what you want to learn, be very conscious of where you want to learn it from, and then go on the internet and proactively mold it according to a conscious effort of your will. And actually, to be honest, and it sounds strange for a digital researcher to say this, basically rely on much more analog forms of working out who is an expert and who is not an expert. I think we also need to give ourselves a break from the pandemic online. We need to kind of, I say, give ourselves a very much a kind of quota system of maybe looking up and checking what's going on in the news for a very small sliver of time once a day. I'll end with my, I guess, golden rule, which is that I would really like many more of us to start treating our information diets a lot more like our diets. I think that information has health consequences. It changes who we think we are. It changes what we do. It changes the relationships that we cherish. It changes why we get up in the morning. It changes the things that are most important to us. Much like food, if you consume junk, it will have consequences for the rest of your life. This is a moment, I think, of great opportunity in the sense that we are all remaking our habits in ways which we really haven't done in the past. And probably in a world now more digital than at any other point in history, remaking our digital habits is a really good place to begin.